give everybody time to find the class together. Now, for those of you who are new, or who were not here Monday, the syllabus is on High College. And I'm going to go over that now in the next few minutes. And also other materials that you need for the courses on iCollege, including a study guide for the first pass. All right, the test. I've been working on the test off and on all day since about 10 o'clock. So anyway, the test will consist of 29 questions, but they are fill-in-the-blank type questions or short answer. Fill-in-the-blank short answer. That is a for instance. Now, I don't know if you're going to see this question or not, but anyway, for instance, if you see the word Hatshepsut, and if you put down Hatshepsut is the name of a river, I mean, I'm going to have to count it wrong. I'll go over a little bit what the name Hatshepsut means. But, anyway, it's a fill-in-the-blank, but some of the answers you'll find at the back page of the test, and some of them you won't. So it's kind of like a matching, except not all the matching is there. That's the first test. Now later I'll be giving possibly multiple choice tests. Now the pass, that's something else. The pass is multiple choice. The study guide for the pass is on iCollege. The study guide for the first test, we don't have one. All right. Before I proceed, do any of you have any questions? Yes?
You said we can do any addition of the textbook.
Any addition you want to of the textbook, even back to the first edition. These authors have not changed the book that much from one edition to the next. The big change, somewhere 5 or 6 years ago, they took chapter 12 and broke into 2 chapters, 12 and 13. But that's the only major change I've noticed. Other than a little bit of, well, now they took out some stories I like to read. Sad to say, they took out the story of Cincinnatus, the Roman general. That's gone. They took out one about Julius Caesar being assassinated. That's gone. Yes.
Excuse me. So I didn't see the day of the quiz syllabus.
Well, now, all right. Now, if you didn't see the date of the first test on the syllabus, believe me, it is there.
The quiz. I mean the quiz.
Oh, right here, pass 1, August 31st. Pass 1, yeah, it's there. Now, the date, all right, the test 1 and pass 1 will be given simultaneously, same time.
Yeah.
Okay, and the same thing will go for test 2 and pass 2 and test 3 and pass 3. And part of the reason for that is it's just easier on me. And another reason for that is they are due by a state regulation, at a certain time, and I want to give them ahead of the due date. So like the first pass is really due September 20th, I believe, or sometime around there. I want to give it ahead of time. And the same thing with pass 2, I'm giving it ahead of time, and then pass 3, and giving it ahead of time. If you fail the passes, it will go on your computer, on my computer, and it will be sent higher up, and someone will be contacting you to find out what the problem is, and you and I are supposed to get together and see if we can work out something to where you can do better performance. For some of you, this might be your first college class. And again, you don't know what to expect on your first test, and I can understand that. I've had many a student fail the first test and wind up with an A on the second test. They just did not know fully well what level of preparation they had to pass the test, to pass my test. You have to have a little bit of preparation, unless you know it already. Now, I've had a few students down through the years who have known the material pretty well already, and they could ace the course, but that's the exception rather than the rule. The first pass is primary versus secondary. Again, a primary source where that you dig up an old document or a cuneiform clay tablet. That's a primary source. Secondary source is where someone writes about events that happened many years ago based on what they have read from, mostly from primary sources, but they use maybe secondary sources also. And again, If you study the study guide, it's pretty much self-explanatory. All right. Now, to help some students who cannot seemingly make good grades, let me say 2/3 of my pupils make A's and B's, the ones that finish the course. But not everybody does. And every test I give, I have 2 or 3 persons who can't seem to do better than a 65 or something. The way you can raise your grade, well, there's 2 or 3 ways. Number one is turn in a good paper, turn in your paper early, attend the symposiums. Those things will help. Another way, well, of course, basically study a little bit harder. The paper, I have to, in order for it to raise your grade, I have to give it clout, folks. That works both ways. It'll help the person who does it, and persons who don't do it can expect to have their grade lowered by at least 2 letters. Do the math. It counts something like 22% of your final average. With more than 1/5 of your final average, make that a 0, and you can't get any better than 80% for your final average, even if you have hundreds on everything else. So you need to do the paper. Now, this case is almost comical. This time last year, a fellow who sat right in there, and that part, I'm not saying more about him. He studied really hard. He made A's on all the tests, had a really good paper. Come time for the final exam, he decided, well, I've been setting the curve all the time. He really had. He'd set the curve only twice on the 5 tests. But he thought he would help every one of his fellow classmates by failing the final exam. So he made the lowest grade in the class on the final exam. In the meantime, 8 or 10 other students made A's, so he really did not do anything to help the curve. He wound up with a B for the course. He, did I really make low? I said, well, do the math. Here's the average. You really did poorly on the final exam, and then he admitted he had deliberately lowered it. Tried to make a low grade on the final exam, but the final exam has clout for more than the other test. So don't get the idea that I'm going to help my fellow classmates by doing badly. You have to get the whole class to agree to that. If one person disagrees and that one person is a sharp student, you fail your purpose. Don't try that, folks. Now, something else I want to say about grades. Don't come up to me and tell me I have to make an A in this class to keep my Hope Scholarship. Well, if you really need to make an A in this class to keep your Hope Scholarship, then by all means earn it. Work harder. Now, I know something about Hope Scholarships. My oldest daughter loused up her first semester at her college and lost her Hope Scholarship. It was hard on us. We had to pitch in and pay her tuition for a couple semesters. Eventually she got it back. I won't go into detail what happened, but she loused up really badly her first semester. And my second daughter never had that problem. Even though she got borderline one time, but she was able to keep her scholarship throughout, and she's now at the University of Georgia, still going through one on Hope Scholarship. But if you have to keep your Hope Scholarship, make sure you keep your grades up. Don't expect I'm going to give you a grade just because you need one. I won't. Hopefully we're clear on that. Earn it. Again, if 2/3 of you, of my students can make A's and B's, and you're one of the ones who can't, it can't be because I'm too hard. It might be due to something else. All right. Again, first test is August 31st. I'm working feverishly on it. Second test is September 14th. Now, we have a drop deadline. Before the drop deadline, we will have had 3 tests in here. Test 3 is October 7th. We'll have 3 tests, and the drop deadline is October 13th. Then you'll have 3 chances to prove whether or not you can, and that's more than I used to give. It used to be you only had 2. But if you louse up on the first test, again, I throw out the lowest test score. That does not apply to the final exam. But the other test scores I throw out. So now, when I say that I've had students go from an F to an A from test 1 to test 2, I've also seen the reverse. I've seen students go from an A to an F. How can that be? Simply, oh, this is easy, so they let up. What I'm about to tell you is not true in every case, but I've seen it in a lot of cases. If you are an A student, you have to make an A in order to stay afloat. You can't make a B, you can't make a C. You can barely make a D, but you're either going to make your A or you're going to make an F. Now, if you're a B student, you have to make your B or you're going to make an F. I mean, I had a student, some years back, just struggling hard, and all that she could get was B's. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what your problem is you're only a B student, at least based on the type of testing I'm giving. And maybe you're not a B student with every other teacher or every other class, but in here, your abilities is just such, and there's nothing wrong in being a B student. I made far more B's than I made A's when I was in college myself. So basically, I was a B student. If a B is the best you can do it. But you're going to have to make, if you're a B student, you have to make that B or you're going to fail. You can't make a C, you can't make a D. You have to make your grade. And again, that's not always true. All right. Let's see. Most of this stuff here in this syllabus is self-explanatory. If you need to contact me, let me advise you. You can try my cell phone. If you tried it right now, it wouldn't work. My cell phone's in my car on purpose, so it won't be bothering me here in the class. But you can try to contact a cell phone. If that doesn't work, you're welcome to call my wife. My home phone has been taken out. Took it out in March. It was just an unnecessary expense. Nobody in the family needed it anymore. Some of you might have done the same thing. So everybody in my family now we have 6 working cell phones for the 5 of us. My wife uses 2. Anyway, you can call her. You can email me by the call email. Don't use iCollege. I simply rarely ever check my iCollege mail. Just follow procedure and use the email address I've given here. jcunning@gpc.edu. Again, or this cell phones. Don't go to the Department of Secretary, Department Head. They usually have only the foggiest idea of where I am. I don't have an office. I'm part-time. But you're welcome to contact me. Let's see. Oh, yes. I have a date here, the paper about the papers. Don't ask me why, but I mean, I sometimes had trouble meeting deadlines when I was in college, so I'm kind of lenient. I will take the 5 points off. But now, when I say that the paper is due at a certain date, it's turned in on iCollege, but I'm not going to stay up till midnight to see who turned it in before the deadline. I mean, I always get to bed earlier than that, and when I get up the next morning, I'll turn on my computer and see who's turned it. If you turn it in after midnight or even after 2 or 3 a.m., I'm going to count it just the same. But if you turn it in after 8 or 9 or 10 a.m., I'm going to dock your points. So in other words, get it in ahead of time, preferably. Now, again, I'll take them late, but I will knock off 10 points. And I'll say something else, folks. If somebody turns a paper in really, really late, I have on occasion reread the thing 2 or 3 times to see if I can't find another excuse to take off more points. I mean, hey, I'm human too. And also I will on occasion, I mean, of course I give 6 points. The persons who turn their papers in early, I do grade them more leniently. Again, the reason for that is I think they're more interested or care more. So you can do yourself a favor and do me one too by turning the papers in early. And I say that, and guess what? Again, only the A students generally do. There are a few exceptions, but mostly the persons who turn their papers in early, the persons who attend the symposiums are A students who don't need the points anyway. Fine and dandy. All right. Having said that. Oh yes, the final, I keep getting asked this over and over again. The final exam, half of it will cover chapters 11 and 12. That's because there is no test on chapter 11 and 12. The other half is comprehensive. So if you ask the final exam comprehensive, oh, check the syllabus. Yes, it is. There's about 75 questions on a final exam, of which about 35 of them are chapters 11 and 12. The other 40 of them are comprehensive. So we will be going back to chapters 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. There'll be questions on Greece and on Rome and maybe one on Alexander the Great. So it is comprehensive. The final exam, I guarantee you, will be multiple choice. And here's why. I mean, maybe you know why. A multiple choice test can be graded in an instant. These other tests where I'm giving, I have to read your answers and decide, is this worth all 3 points, or should I take 1 point off of this? And I have to make something of a decision. That takes time. Come December, I don't want to take that time. So the final exam will definitely be multiple choice. The first test will not. I've had students beg me to just give multiple choice tests, and for years I did. And I say, hey, I'm going to try something else. I tried it, and I'll tell you this about the multiple choice test. Everybody is going to make somewhere between 60% and 90% because of the nature of the test. You can guess. If you just simply close your eyes and guess, you're going to get 25% off right with 4 choices. But some of the questions don't even have 4 choices. So if you know anything at all, you'll probably get 50% of them right just for taking the test. Now, fill in the blank test, as you notice, the fill in the blank, the grades will range anywhere from 30% to 100. Oh yeah, multiple choice, I said they range from anywhere from 60 to 90%. Even the better students will last up on a few question multiple choice test. And sometimes I see a case where that one person missed this question, which is a really easy question. So, who missed that one? And it's usually some A+ student who thought it was too easy and went for the fake. But they determined they weren't going to go for the fake, so they wound up getting faked out anyway. But the true-false test, again, most everybody will get at least 50%. Nobody hardly gets above 90% because it's too easy. You have to differentiate between Tweedledum and Tweedledee, or between red and rose and crimson and scarlet. And that's very difficult to do on some occasions. All right, having said that, what else? The rest of this is very much self-explanatory, I believe. I've been told that my syllabus is longer than anybody else's, and here's why. Over the years, they've told me you must put this on a syllabus, must put that, and I keep adding everything and never taking anything away, and the result is that after years I have a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of stuff that they have told me has been required. I want to point you to turn it in. Now, I don't know if any of you have logged in to turn it in yet or not, but you do need this number. And I'll be checking probably later this week to see if anybody, here's a problem I had one semester. Nobody could log in to turn it in. Well, that was my fault. I'd given some wrong information. So I've been a little bit more careful, but I want to see if anybody has tried to log in. Again, if your classmates can do it. And I've had cases where students say, I can't get in to turn it in. Well, if 34 of your classmates can do it, why can't you? Anyway, but like I said, if nobody can, it's probably me. All right, but if everybody can but you. Speaking of computers, if you really run into a computer problem, there is a man upstairs, Nelson Young by name, on the 3rd floor. He's there to help you. The library, most of these librarians are really computer savvy. They can help you also. All right, let's see, anything else? Now, when you give the password Sumer, you must capitalize the S in Sumer. Again, oh yeah, I want to say this about cell phones. Come test time, they must not be visible. And don't try sitting there and looking down at your lap. I mean, I'm looking at you while you take your test. So, but basically, they should be completely out of sight, out of mind. made a little speech about that once, and right away, first thing that happened, my own cell phone went off. It doesn't happen very often, but anyway, I make sure that won't happen today. My cell phone is in my car. It belongs while I'm up here. All right, oh yeah, and about testing now. We're all adults here. I'll try to remember to give you a chance that any one of you who needs to leave the classroom, leave it right now before I pass out the test booklets. Then you're welcome. I'll welcome you to come back in. But once we start taking the test, if you leave, I have to ask you to turn in your test booklet. The test is over. All right, now are we clear on that? There might be some exceptions made if you have a genuine handicap that I'm going to, that I must by law accommodate you and work with you. But otherwise, I expect you to. Did have one person first test last fall, late in August, just about 3 minutes into the test, got up, threw the pass and the test book in the trash can and walked out off the course. So she could have at least given me her test book back. Been good manners. The thing about it is, more than half of her classmates made A's on that test. Well, why didn't she? I don't know. Yes?
How many essays?
There's only one essay to do if you talk about the paper. There's only one paper.
Oh.
Yes?
Where it says grades will be determined on a formula, it says there's 2 projects. Is that
Oh. There's one, thank you. All right. I know how that happened. I copied the syllabus from last spring's, and did not delete that part of it. Now, there's something else I noticed on in one place it says 1,000 word. If you look carefully, there's another place where it says 750. When I make that mistake, folk, legally, I've got to go in your favor with the 750. I will accept the 750 word paper, 3 pages. It's something that, okay. I tell myself I'm going to catch, but I often don't. And I was just talking to some of my fellow part-timers, and they've made some goof ups on the syllabus also. In my case, once I put the syllabus out, I don't like to change it. So it remains as it is. 750 words in one place, 1,000 another. Do a 750 word paper. It says 1 project in one place, 2 projects in another. We're doing 1. Okay. All right. Excellent question. Anybody else? Yes.
what about the paper with the signature?
Oh, yeah, the contract. Anybody have them? I'll take them now. I'd rather you gave them to me at the end of the class, but I'll take them now. All right. Okay. I want to make sure I can read your writing. I get some of them sometimes when they, I mean, my own handwriting is bad, but sometimes anyway, yes.
I wasn't here on my day, so where's that contract? We're supposed to print that out?
Oh, the contract is the last 2 pages of the syllabus.
Okay. you just-
Yeah, it's at the end of the syllabus, yeah.
Do we get like points for that or something?
What's that?
Do we have to turn that in? We get points for that?
Here's what my department secretary told me just less than 5 days ago. They do want us to collect them, and we ourselves hold on to them. We no longer turn them in the department. We do expect to turn them in, but you know, I'll stop right there. Stop right there. I do keep a record of who does and who doesn't. There's not much else I can do. I mean we're all adults here now. I mean, I'm not going to dock your grade if you don't. Legally, I can't. But the contract shows that you have agreed to the terms. Also, generally, the persons who turn them in are more dedicated students and have more on the ball than the persons who don't. And I noticed that. All right. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay. I'm going to leave this. And go to something else on this same page. And while that is loading up, I will. Okay, excellent. All right, now if you can't read that, you should have read it. I mean, actually, I don't guess most of you can read that. I'll go over it in a little bit in a few minutes. But first, I want to direct your attention to something that I've never taught from before. This might seem more like it's for literature class than a history class, but here's why I'm bringing it up in this class. This story was in fact considered serious history by the people we're talking about, by the Sumerians. The story is about Enmerkar, who fought a war with the king of Aratta. Now, yes, something about this will be on your test. There's about 3 or 4 names, I don't remember. One name is Enmerkar. Another one is in a Sumerian tongue, this word En meant very, very high one. The gods Enki, Enlil, very, very high. Lugal was the title for king. En was a female form of this En. Now this Inanna was a woman, and she is believed by some to have been the instigator of all the polytheistic religions that we find throughout the world. That does not include Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, which are monotheistic. Now, I use 2 terms here. Monotheism and polytheism. All right. Anybody know what these 2 terms mean? Yes?
One God, many gods.
Yeah, polytheism is the worship of many gods. Monotheism is the worship of just one God. Now, folk, what I'm about to say is somewhat controversial, but there are persons who believe that originally all mankind was monotheistic, and then some things happened that made mankind into polytheistic. And some people believe that the instigator of all these polytheistic religions was Inanna herself, a woman who was claimed that she was part God and part human. Actually, all 3 of these we believe were claimed to be part God and part human. This king is listed on a king list first. He was king number 2. He was king number 3. The next king after is Gilgamesh, whom you might have seen in your literature classes. Your book mentions Gilgamesh, so I can let you read him for yourself. Anyway, in this story, Inanna originally was married to the king of Aratta, but she decided one day she wanted to visit her son Enmerkar, who was king of Uruk. So she made the long journey from Aratta to Uruk, and she married the king of Uruk. If it sounds sick, I'm sorry, but apparently married her son, according to some accounts, and abandoned her husband then, the king of Aratta. And then she wanted a temple built in her honor. But the problem is, in the land of Sumer, there was no precious stones, no gold, no precious stones, but there was plenty of that there in Aratta. So they decided to try to persuade the king of Aratta to give up some of his precious stones, which the king of Aratta was reluctant to do. What followed was a 10-year or so long war of words and war of magic and war of champions fighting champions, the details of which I'll somewhat skip, but it wound up ending up that Enmerkar got his jewels. The temple in Uruk was built to Inanna, and Inanna set herself up as a goddess. She's known in the Bible as the Queen of Heaven, but she's not called by her name Inanna. Some people believe that she also is known as Isis in Egypt. Yes, that term Isis we are hearing a lot about. Or Venus or Aphrodite among the Greeks and Romans. The Greeks called her Aphrodite, the Romans called her Venus, or among the Norsemen, she's known as Frigga. The Norse gods were gods like Loki and Thor and Odin, and their main goddess was Frigga. Anyway, these stories were again looked on as being true history by the people who lived at the time. Now, moving on down, the next one, Lugapanda. Lugal Banda was initially a soldier in Merkar's army. According to the account, he took sick, and his fellow soldiers put him in a cave, and because they couldn't stop the campaign, they left him in the cave, hoping for the best. So he went to the cave and passed out and remained unconscious for some days. Then he woke up, and he prayed to some of the gods, particularly Utu and Shamash and Inanna. And 2 or 3 of these gods actually came to visit in the cave. You know, these gods were not necessarily figments of imagination. In their way of thinking, they could fly, they could travel. They came to visit the cave, and they nursed him back to health. But while he was being nursed to health, he prepared a meal for the gods, and it was said that Lugal Banda could just sense the evil in these gods, could sense their hatred for all humankind, including hatred for him, and even though he was part God himself. While he was recovering also, he befriended a certain little young Anzu bird. The mother came looking for the Anzu bird, and when they realized that Lugal Banda had shared his food with his new pet Anzu bird, the mother bird gave Lugal Banda the gift of super speed, which the Anzu bird had herself. With this, Lugal Banda then was able to recover quickly and join his army quickly, and join in Merkar, who was still besieging the city of Errata. But the story doesn't end there. When Merkar realized he could not take Errata, he needed some advice from Inanna, and Inanna was back at Uruk, about more than 1,000 miles away. So, Lugal Banda, did not wishing to give away the secret he had super speed, volunteered, hey, I can go back, so let me go back. So in Merkar let Lugal Banda go back. Lugal Banda made the 1,000-mile trip in a matter of a very short time. Talked to Inanna, got a secret from Inanna, and went back, and with the secret help that he'd given Lugal Banda, that Inanna gave Lugal Banda took this signature in Merkar, and with that he was able to defeat Errata and get the jewels that he needed for the temple to honor his new wife Inanna. Now, I want to reiterate that every ancient peoples began their history with stories just like this. I mean, for those of you who are of British descent, the story of Arthur pulling the sword out of the stone after Merlin had cast a spell on the stone. Every ancient group begins its history. And you look on a historical chart, and I have a couple of historical charts in my house, and it will say at some point, period of reliable history begins. In other words, before this, we don't rely on it. But after this, we consider this reliable from this point on. Again, folk, historians will read these. I mean, well, you see, they have lines. These messages are numbered, the lines are numbered. And sometimes when you're reading these old clay tablets, you get to a point where you can't read it because the clay tablet is broken off or has been obliterated so bad it cannot be read. But they'll read these, and they were thinking at first, hey, we're going to learn a lot of history. The problem is, they don't believe anything of what they're reading. Modern scholarship simply cannot take these stories at face value. All right. This is all the time I want to spend on this. Unless any of you have any questions or comments. Again, you won't read much about Lugal Banda and Merkar in your literature classes unless you take advanced world literature or something, but they're considered literature. Just like Gilgamesh, you probably will read about Gilgamesh in your literature classes. The ancients did not consider him to be fantasy, but they considered Gilgamesh to be serious history. All right. As for Isis, I'll have more to say about her when we come to the section on Egypt. Oh yeah, here's the one, Lugal Banda in the mountain cave. This gives you some idea of what modern scholars have had to translate. When they translate word for word, they have to take these words that's very used and make modern day English sentences out of them. Again, it's an art in itself. There is also somewhere in here a story about the Tower of Babel. Oh yeah, right here, where that Enki, the god Enki, confused everybody, changed the speech of everybody's mouth. But up until that time, everybody had spoken one speech. Again, you can take that for whatever you will, but like I said Monday, the idea that some God came and confounded human speech is not by any means only told in one place. It's mentioned in other parts of literature also, and have been books written on the subject of other sources where the people say that there was one time one speech. Now, everybody in the world has stories of a flood. The flood stories in the United States, like it's somehow universally etched in the memory of mankind. Zodiac, 12 symbols of zodiac, again, that seems to be universal in the memory of mankind. A 7-day week cycle, most people observe it, with the 7th day being a day of rest. Again, indicating that mankind once was united, and it, at some point somehow scattered all over the globe. But before that, he once was united. And oh yes, every society has stories about dragons. Now I want to elaborate on that a little bit, of dragon stories. When they describe what the dragons look like, the dragons look remarkably like modern day depictions of dinosaurs. Now, of course, you talk to your standard anthropologist and he will tell you that dinosaurs disappeared from the earth 65 million years ago, and that mankind did not appear until 240 or so thousand years ago. Therefore, man and dinosaur never met. Even though they've taken a poll, and 30% of your high school biology teachers believe that ancient man had contact with dinosaurs, whom we call dragons. You don't have to believe, I mean, you're going to believe what you want to, folk. But I had 2 pupils last fall, both of whom did not believe. They were a husband and wife team. They did not initially believe that dinosaurs were in fact, that dragons were in fact dinosaurs until they did the research. And they learned that there have been dinosaur bones found that still have soft tissue. And both, if you don't believe it, look it up. And how can tissue remain soft after 65 million years? Some of them still had hemoglobin flowing inside blood vessels, not flowing, but hemoglobin inside blood vessels. After 65 million years, hard to imagine. And in the Congo, there have been, the natives will tell you, there have been numerous sightings of creatures in areas that are very, very difficult to get to, very difficult to access. But numerous sightings of creatures that fit some dinosaurs whose bones we have at times dug up. But again, your standard biologist will say, oh no, it can't be dinosaurs because they disappeared 65 million years ago. The proof, the hard, fast proof is still not there. And, but in the rainforest, I mean, you go to some rainforest and you stick out your hand, you can't see your hand for the foliage. Very, very dangerous place to be because the snakes can find you. You can't see them, again, because of dense foliage. There are rumors of all kinds that certain types of creatures have been seen that we thought were extinct. All right, be that as it may, the ancients have all kinds of stories about heroes killing dragons. Sir Lancelot killed a dragon, St. George killed a dragon. Down through the Middle Ages, St. Columba saw a dragon, and he and some men chased a dragon. And one of the kings of England fought a war. Then he was told there was a dragon in a certain area. He went to the area where the dragon was with his army. When he encountered the dragon, instead of waiting for his army to engage the dragon, he went up and tried to engage himself, and the dragon just swallowed him whole. Head, toe, and armor, and shield, and sword, swallowed him whole, and that was the end of that king. Again, you can believe what you want to. These stories were told as serious history. Nobody disbelieved in the existence of dragons in Europe until about the year 1600. In China, it might have taken longer than that. The Chinese have one of their symbols of zodiac. It's a dragon. The Chinese talk a lot about dragons. All right. Again, you can make up your mind for yourself what you believe. You will anyway. All right. I'm going to log off and then proceed. If I don't log off now, I'll forget to. Okay. Something I did not mention, I believe last time, I said that I mentioned that all human females were descended from a certain one woman. And this is because we study the mtDNA, or mitochondrial DNA. Which is passed from mother to daughter. The Y chromosome DNA is passed from father to son. Now, there have been in recent years some exceptions found to this. Sometimes a daughter will get her father's, more of her father's DNA than is normal, or vice versa. But in general, the mitochondrial DNA is passed from mother to daughter. The male Y chromosome DNA passed from father to son. DNA is making a lot of news here of late. DNA tests have proven that President Warren Harding had at least one illegitimate daughter while in the White House. DNA tests have proven that someone who is very, very close related to Thomas Jefferson was the father of all of Sally Hemings' children. You can't quite say it was Jefferson yet, but it looks more and more like it all the time. The problem is with Jefferson's case, there were 5 men, Jefferson, his nephew, and 2 of his cousins who would have had that same DNA at the time Sally Heming was living on Jefferson's plantation. But it looks like Thomas Jefferson is probably the father. Again, DNA tests are bringing up some very interesting results that some people wish that we did not know about. All right. Now, leaving that, Egypt. I'll start off with Egypt, talking about a certain word that I've already mentioned, but you've been hearing a lot in the news. When I first started teaching this class some 15 years ago, nobody had heard the word ISIS used. I found it fascinating because I've done a lot of research on it, and then all of a sudden, in the last couple of years, ISIS, the word is making a lot of news. In original Egyptian folklore, Isis was a goddess who had a son. The son committed a transgression, and someone hacked his body into 13 pieces and sent the pieces all over the world saying, "This will be done to you if you do as this man did." Isis went around and collected the pieces and put them together, but the gods would not agree to bring life back to her son. So she finally made an agreement with another world where she would spend half her time in another world while her son spent the other half in the upper world. Then the other half of the year, her son would go down to another world and she would climb it, but she would never see her son. Never meet him, but at least, now, how many of you have heard this story from other sources, by any chance? The same with about 2 hands, same thing with the other class this morning, about 2 persons had heard this story from other sources. When the one was up at the top, we were having summer. When the other one was up top, we were having winter. This was the reason for the seasons, summer and winter, and when Isis and her son Osiris traded places. Well, we're going to run into the name Isis again in Roman times, because when the Romans began to abandon the worship of Mars and Jupiter and Saturn, some of their old Olympian gods, these same Romans, then some of them began to worship Isis, because Isis had an appeal of the mother-son relationship. Some people believe that the Isis was then incorporated into Christianity with Mary and Jesus, Mary the mother, Jesus the son, and Europeans for many generations would worship Mary almost as if she were God herself. But there's also been rumors that Isis has been worshipped by secret organizations, but in secret. When Christianity took over Western Europe, the cult of Isis went underground, and these secret cults would keep alive the memory of Isis down through the ages. And then, unexpectedly, all of a sudden the name starts making news as an organization bent on taking over all of the Middle East and possibly all of the globe and conquering the whole world. and weirdly enough, using the same name as this ancient goddess from ancient folklore. All right, you can take that for what it's worth, folk. I have long believed that some of these old, or the worship of these old gods would at some point make a comeback. You may not have heard one of what Adolf Hitler proposed to do was restore the worship of Thor and Odin and Loki and Frigga and Tyr, these old Norse gods. He wanted to restore them and get Europeans worshiping them again. He wanted to destroy all Christians, but there were too many of them. But he did manage to greatly reduce the number of Jews. Christians were next on his horizon to find a way to get rid of them. But he was himself destroyed before he could complete his task. Have any of you heard this from any other source? I mean, in the Marietta Library, they have a write-up about Hitler wanting to convert Europe back to the worship of the old Norse gods. One of you is nodding your head like you've seen it. Yeah, these gods might at some point make a comeback. Not that I'm in any way in favor of them, but you might start hearing some of these names again. Marduk, Thor, and Odin. Well, they're big time in movies. All right. Now, anyway, Egypt, without the Nile River, Egypt would be nothing more than just a part of the Sahara Desert. The desert goes some 3,000 miles to the west and hundreds of miles to the east. But what keeps the river, makes Egypt Egypt is the Nile River flows through. Now, until this Aswan Dam was put up, every spring the Nile would overflow its banks. That's because way down here at Lake Victoria, there'd be a rainy season. The rainy season would occur in the spring. When it rained hard down here, it would send a whole lot of water into the Nile River. The Nile would overflow its banks and lay down a fresh layer of topsoil. Then the Egyptians would have this fresh layer of topsoil in which to plant their crops, and they always were guaranteed a good crop without having to practice crop rotation or even fertilization because they had this fresh layer of topsoil. The Egyptians then looked on Egypt as being the perfect place to live. They said the gods made Egypt first and made it perfect. Then as an afterthought, they created the rest of the world, but none of the rest of the world has the perfection Egypt had. In the land of Egypt, it rains about once every 100 years. In the land of Egypt, the weather is always predictable. You always know when to plant your crops. The temperature varies. Well, from day to day, it varies very little. Now, they do have a winter season, of course, and they have a spring and they have a summer. But you pretty well can predict the temperatures, the highs and lows, several years in advance because the weather just simply is highly regular and highly predictable. Now, the Egyptians counted time, like all the other ancients, based on the rule of their kings. In such and such a year of so-and-so, we did thus and such. So it would be this year of the king. Their kings were organized according to dynasties. Dynasty 1, Dynasty 2, Dynasty 3, Dynasty 4. Now, the word dynasty, it means to rule by a family, usually from father to son, where the throne is passed down from generation to generation. The average dynasty only lasts about 3 to 4 generations. Some of them do not last that long. Eventually what happens is you have a mighty empire builder. Some great man will come along and he'll build up an empire. When he dies, he turns it over to his son who cannot manage what he's built up, and the whole thing collapses. This has happened time and time and time and time again throughout history. Now there is one exception. When it comes to Japan, the current Japanese ruling dynasty has been on the throne for at least 2,600 years. Again, the Japanese mentality is such that no one would dare kill the emperor because the Japanese would never recognize anyone else as an emperor except for a member of the family. You have to be born into it. There's no way you can become king unless you're emperor, unless you're born into it. The present Queen of England can trace her genealogy back to a king who lived in the 400s, King Serdic, who lived in 400 AD. We believe he was a real historical figure. All the kings listed before him, we aren't sure of their real historicity, but if you can believe the genealogy she has, she can trace her ancestry all the way back to Adam. She can supply with the names of her ancestors. She's a son of George VI, who was a son of George V, and so back and back and back and back. If one of her ancestors was George III, who we rebelled against, and all the way back. Another one's William the Conqueror, and all the way back to Cerdic, and then his father, Cynric, and then so on and so forth, and all the way back supposedly to Adam, if you can believe it. Anyway, dynasty ruled by a family. The Egyptians, their first dynasty, ruled for a while, and then gave way to the second and the third and the fourth. Now here, folk, is the weird thing about Egyptian history. We are accustomed to, the later something is, the better. The newer the car, the better it is. I mean, I'm old enough to remember my dad's cars. This month it was the transmission. Next month it might be the universal joint breakdown. I'm talking about breakdown. Next month it'd be radiators forming a leak. Well, get that fixed. Next month it would need brake lining. Next month it would need a muffler. Then the next month it would need a wheel bearing. Then in the meantime it would always need tires constantly. Hopefully most of you don't know what I'm talking about. Some of those old cars, and I talked to a friend of mine whose father was probably a little bit richer than mine. And yeah, my dad had the same problem. Just one problem, breakdown after another. Today's cars seldom throw a wheel bearing. The engine lasts 300,000 to 400,000 miles in some cases. 200,000 miles shouldn't even touch them. All right, go back to the history of Egypt. And the farther back in time you get, the better they get. And the nearer you get to modern times, the less they get. The pyramids were made during the first dynasty, folk. Why didn't they make them after that? They didn't have the wealth to, for one thing. Maybe they didn't see the need to. It has been said that the Great Pyramid, which is one of the only wonder of the ancient world that's still standing, it's been said that we, with our modern machinery, could not rebuild the Great Pyramid even if we wanted to. We cannot raise the 60-ton granite stones to the height that they did. If we can't, how did they do it? We don't know. Some of these stones were known to have been mined in a quarry way down here 600 miles away. Well, how did they get those stones from a quarry to the pyramid site at Giza? Well, they floated them on logs. There's a problem with that, folk. There are no forests in this part of the world and haven't been in at least 10,000 years. Some people you say they rolled them on logs. I mean, you've probably seen heavy loads rolled on the log, and then when it rolls off the back log, put the back log on front, roll it. You can't roll a 60-ton stone on a log. But again, you have another problem. There are no forests in Egypt. There is no trail in this part of the world, any trail that they would have made carrying 60-ton stones, we'd still find remnants of it. There are none. In Africa, the continent of Africa is layered like so. And the rivers, except for the Congo, the rivers will flow along for a while, then drop off. These drop-offs are called cataracts. Well, the Nile River has several cataracts along it. If you try to get any kind of cargo, you have to, when you get near the cataract, of course you have to offload the cargo, go around the cataract and reload the cargo at this part of the river until you come to the next cataract. There's no evidence that they ever did that in the land of Egypt, particularly when they're dealing with stones as heavy as the ones, the big ones, the Great Pyramid. The big heavy stones would have left marks that would still be visible 4,000 years later. All right, how did they make them? There's enough stones in the Great Pyramid to go around the nation of France 3 times if they were placed end to end. They're going to completely encircle France 3 times. if the pyramid really was built in 20 years, it would have meant that the men would have had to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and put a stone in place about every second and a half. Now granted, some of them might have been working on one corner and some working on another. When you start doing that, though, when the stones come together and they happen to fit perfectly, I mean, you've got a remarkable feat of engineering. That is the way, by the way, that we built the Transcontinental Railroad. One group started in California and headed east, another group started in Missouri and headed west, and eventually they met. Then the last spike driven was a golden spike. No, that spike has long since been pulled off, but through the ceremony they laid down a golden spike at the last spike they put down. All part of the story of the Transcontinental Railroad. But they might have. But again, folks, we simply do not know how they put these. And the Great Pyramid is one of only 100. The next pyramid next to it, the Pyramid of Khephren, is not much smaller than the Great Pyramid, supposedly built by Khufu's son, Khephren. These pyramids, the big ones I'm talking about, were built during the 4th dynasty. After a certain amount of time, I mean, okay, Egypt's history again is divided into dynasties, but it's also divided into kingdoms. You have your old kingdom, your middle kingdom, and your new. Each of these kingdoms were bordered by an intermediate period. This is the first intermediate. And second intermediate. These intermediate periods were known to be periods of chaos, when law and order broke down and a lot of turmoil hit. Then eventually some powerful person bring order out of the chaos and life would start over again. But each of these kingdoms were less than the one before. The old kingdom built the pyramids. They built a canal joining the Red Sea to the Nile River. They built a canal right here joining the Red Sea to the Nile River, and later Egyptian pharaohs could not even keep the canal open. Desert sands blew in and silted up the canal. But parts of the canal are still there. You know, it's in the land of Egypt, old things get preserved, and parts of the later pharaohs were not even powerful enough or rich enough to keep it open. But the earlier ones, again, the farther back in time you go, the more advanced they seem to be. And then come to newer times. The Middle Kingdom, yeah, they built temples and palaces. The New Kingdom, their temples and palaces were noticeably smaller and less wealthy than the ones built in the Middle Kingdom. Again, the farther in time you go, it seems like the poorer they became, the less advanced they became. Now, oh yes, the Egyptian kings went by a title, Pharaoh. It's amazing how some of these ancient things wind up making news in modern times. Back in the spring, a horse named American Pharaoh made a lot of news. Some of you might be aware. First Triple Crown winner in 40 years. They misspelled the name, though. Anyway, the word Pharaoh, now the Pharaoh was looked on by the other Egyptians as being a god and not a mere human. Particularly when he died, he would become a god more so than he was while alive. But even while alive, he was destined for the skies. We might say destined to become a god. This was something that the kings of Sumer and Babylon tended not to do. All right. Time went on. Let's see. The Egyptians were somewhat isolated from the rest of humanity by the fact that their land was surrounded by desert. But it is known that they did venture out at times into the Mediterranean Sea and trade. You might wonder, why didn't they spend more time in this region here? Simply because every spring there would be an unpredictable flood and this area would just change, and they looked on changes being chaos. So it has been said that when this was the area called the land of Goshen, And it's been said when the Jews came to live among them, the Pharaoh at the time let the Jews live in this land because the regular Egyptians didn't want to live there because it was just too chaotic. A big flood would come every spring and just change the shape of this, and farmers would know, hey, my land was washed away completely. Can I have some other land from someone else? And another one, well, no, my land wasn't washed away, but you can't have my land. Anyway, so that the Egyptians tend to prefer this land here and leave this alone. But they did sometimes venture here and trade. Now, eventually, a big city of Alexandria was built by Alexander the Great. And the Egyptians are known to have traded sometimes with the Greeks, sometimes with the Canaanites. They would sometimes cross this desert here, and occasionally we had a few Egyptian pharaohs who conquered the region of Canaan and the region of Lebanon. But that was the exception rather than the rule. In general, the Egyptian kings were content to live right here along the two banks of the Nile. Upper Egypt, we think of upper as being north, but actually this region, the southern Egypt, was called Upper Egypt, and this region was called Lower Egypt. You might say, why was that? Because this had a higher latitude, higher elevation above sea level in this region. So the Egyptians, they called this the Upper Egypt, and the South Egypt was upper, North Egypt was lower. The Egyptians had a real fascination for the falcon. Some of their gods, in fact, all they're pictured with falcon heads, human bodies with 2 arms and 2 legs with a falcon-shaped head. And as part of their ritual, their desire for happy afterlife, I better try that word. This is a foreign word. Ka. The nearest English translation of that word is soul. The Egyptians believed that their Ka would go into the next life, and their Ka was depicted in the shape of a falcon, like their soul would go into the next life. They also prized their book of the dead. Now, the book of the dead consisted of just 10 lines. There were 10 things that each person was to face the gods and declare that he had not done. And a lot of persons have compared it to the 10 Commandments, and that after all, Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace and might have been schooled in the Egyptian arts. But when an Egyptian person died, he was expected to go to the court of the gods. We were to say to the gods, I never moved my neighbor's landmark. This is very important because every time a flood came, which was every year, people got to find their old landmark. Well, sometimes it was known that some of them might just decide, hey, I can sneak out at night when the ground is still muddy. I can just slide in my neighbor's landmark over a little bit. But he was expected to say to the gods, I never moved my neighbor's landmark. I always treated my children fairly. 10 things you expect to do. I am no adulterer. No lie ever passed through my lips. And, there's none of us that can truthfully say that. None of us. But they were expected to say that in the court of the gods. And if they could convince the gods that they had really lived a righteous life, they could expect that they would go into a happy afterlife. Also, as part of their fascination for the afterlife, the Egyptian pharaohs in particular would try to take some of their wealth with them. So when the Egyptian pharaoh died, they would pack away food and grains. And in the dry Egyptian climate, this food would last for hundreds of years. But also the bodies were well preserved and mummified to be preserved. But they would carry some of their wealth with them. Unfortunately, grave robbers broke into their tombs down through the ages and robbed them. Now, one exception was King Tut. We found King Tut's tomb, and it was undisturbed since he was buried, and all of his wealth was there. But for most of them, the grave robbers came in and destroyed a lot of their wealth, carried off a lot of their wealth. But they believed that they could carry this wealth with them into the next life. Chinese were to copy the same thing. We'll talk about China in a couple of chapters. And if you study your human migration patterns, there was at least one group of Chinese that migrated from here, which is why the Chinese history and Egyptian history might have a whole lot in common. The Chinese emperors were also very much concerned with a happy afterlife, and they believed they could carry their wealth with them. And the wealth was guaranteed to follow them wherever they went, into the next world. All right. Some of their chief gods: Osiris, Isis, Horus. Don't worry so much about your names, except for this one I do want you to remember. And again, she might have been associated with Inanna, the goddess of the Sumerians, or whom the Bible calls the Queen of Heaven. All right. Now, this brings me up to the story of the children of Israel having gone into Egypt. If you look at secular standard records, the standard historian will tell you, oh, there's nothing to it, we can't find a record. But if you look at some alternate histories, you can find a record. You can find records that describe the 10 plagues, the plague of a bunch of frogs and lice and flies, but it's in the wrong time period. Again, it's known that Egyptian historians apparently deliberately distorted their history to try to make their history look older than anyone else's. They could do that because only their scribes knew their history and knew their dates. Now, supposing we didn't have accurate dating in our history, and some scribes wanted to increase the length of American history to make it look like we're older than, say, France, one way they could do that. All right, you all know that we had two presidents one time, Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis. Well, if you put Abraham Lincoln first and gave him 4 years as president, and then put Jefferson Davis after Abraham Lincoln and gave him 4 years, you've added 4 years to American history. Well, take all the governors of all our states and put them end to end instead of simultaneously, because they would have governed simultaneously. But put them end to end, and you could add 2,000 years to American history. The Egyptians are believed to have taken their dynasties and made it look like they were ruling end to end, when we know a lot of them were probably ruling concurrently at the same time. One dynasty over this part of Egypt, one dynasty over that. So they would distort their history to make them look older than they actually were. But again, we as some of us start going in and trying to reconstruct their history, and we think that by putting the events of the described in the Bible, the biblical account of Exodus, in the proper time frame, we can find it that it probably occurred in this time period called the Second Intermediate Period. Here's what happened. The Middle Kingdom all of a sudden abruptly came to an end. Already come to an end? Well, about this time the Hyksos, a barbaric people, came in and took over Egypt. Why would the Hyksos take over? Well, Egypt had no army. What happened to Egypt's army? If you believe the biblical account, they were all drowned in the Red Sea. With Egypt without an army, all of a sudden these barbarians living here in the desert were able to come in, take over Egypt, and they ruled Egypt for 200 years. Eventually the Egyptians were able to overthrow and overpower the Hyksos and drive them out. Which brings me to the next point, then I will close. When you have a group of civilized people surrounded by uncivilized, generally which side usually wins in the long run? The uncivilized. Usually win. Now, the exception was when Europeans found the American Indians uncivilized. That was an exception. The Europeans wound up winning, and it was because the Europeans greatly outnumbered. It wasn't because the Europeans had guns and horses. The Indians eventually got the guns and got the horses and learned how to use them. They became excellent sharpshooters and excellent horsemen, but they didn't have the numbers. American Indian women didn't want to have more than 1 or 2 babies per woman, and they only lived 18 years and everything. Their population declined drastically, and they would have become extinct possibly had not the Europeans came over and saved them from extinction. That may not be the way you've heard it, but they were destroying themselves due to lack of population. In the meantime, Europeans came over and their women were having 8 or 10 babies per woman. Hey, pick the winners. In addition to all the other Europeans that just kept pouring in. Pick the winners, folk. Generally, uncivilized women have more children than their civilized counterparts. And in the long run, over periods of hundreds of years, The uncivilized will outnumber the civilized by so much that the civilization won. This is because it's especially true when we talk about the Roman Empire. Okay, everybody.